Now the latest from ITV News Meridian in the south.
Good evening and welcome to ITV News Meridian.
The headlines where you are. Private Cheryl James was not unlawfully killed, but tonight a scathing verdict on what life was really like at Deep Cut Barracks, and praise for her parents who fought for the truth.
Deep Cut was a toxic and horrible environment for a young woman, and we have no doubt that this would have had a terrible impact on those that were required to live there.
The Army failed in its duty of care 21 years on from the first of 4 deaths. What now for the families of the other young recruits who all died in mysterious circumstances?
Also tonight, all for Horatio, why entrepreneur Emma Bridgewater is opening up her garden to help realise a teenager's dream.
And shin pads at the ready. The big names in football versus the big names in showbiz, all for one very good cause. Good evening. She was one of 4 Army recruits found dead in suspicious circumstances at Deep Cut Barracks. But today, a coroner ruled that Private Cheryl James had not been unlawfully killed.
The 18-year-old was found dead 21 years ago with a bullet wound to the head. This was the second inquest into her death. Coroner Brian Barker QC was, however, scathing in his criticism of the Army and said it had failed in its duty of care. There had long been allegations of bullying and sexual assault at the Deep Cut base near Frimley in Surrey. Cheryl was one of 3 young recruits found dead there over several years.
Well, this new inquest came after much pressure from Cheryl's parents and the campaign group Liberty, and it revealed what life was really like for young soldiers at the time.
Well, live now to Divya Kohli outside Woking Coroner's Court. Divya, what was the reaction from Cheryl's family tonight?
Yes, Des and Doreen have long campaigned for this new inquest, wanting to know the truth about how their daughter died and how she was treated as a recruit. Tonight, no unlawful killing. Instead, the coroner, Judge Barker QC, said he believed Cheryl had shot herself. Residue found she'd been in contact with the rifle before it fired. There was heavy criticism of the Army and the lack of care towards recruits at the time. But Judge Barker praised the James family, saying they'd shown loving fortitude and patience, and this is what they had to say a few moments ago.
Deep Cut was a toxic and horrible environment for a young woman, and we have no doubt that this would have had a terrible impact on those that were required to live there. While we welcome the coroner's findings today on the environment at Deep Cut, we are deeply saddened by the coroner's conclusions, having sat through all of the evidence ourselves, listened carefully to every word, read every statement and reread every testimony. In short, it's our opinion that it did not lead to this verdict. In terms of the environment in which Cheryl lived for the months after she joined the Army, the evidence has revealed serious and profound failures in the care and supervision that ought to have been provided to her and to all of the other young people who joined up the British Army with her.
Well, the coroner said there were shortcomings in how the Army conducted itself at Deep Cut. Private James was left alone on armed guard duty, something that's against Army rules. There were far too few officers looking after recruits who became bored, turning to sex and alcohol to occupy themselves. Young females were seen as a sexual challenge. The coroner talked about Private James having mixed feelings about being in the Army, and at the time of her death, she was in a relationship with 2 people, something she was unhappy about. Tonight, the Army and the police have apologised for their part.
We are truly sorry for the low levels of supervision that we provided for the trainees at Deep Cut in 1995, and for the policies that were applied to using trainees for guard duties, and that we took too long to recognise and rectify the situation.
Surrey Police has long accepted that mistakes were made during this initial investigation. The force should have maintained primacy for it and has previously apologised to the family for those errors. Today, we would reiterate those apologies.
Well, the coroner has said this has been a long and harrowing road for Des and Doreen James, and it has been. Mr. James visibly upset today.
Divya, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Army has always insisted the deaths of the 4 young recruits were all suicides, but each of their families disagreed. All 4 did, however, die in unexplained circumstances. Sangeeta.
Private Sean Benton was the first to die. The 20-year-old was found with 5 gunshot wounds while on guard at a perimeter fence in June 1995. An initial inquest found he killed himself, but a friend at the time said he'd been the target of vicious verbal attacks and humiliating abuse. Private Cheryl James was found dead with a bullet through her forehead in Woodland outside the barracks in November 1995. The Army said she had killed herself, but an inquest then recorded an open verdict. 17-year-old Jeff Gray was the 3rd young recruit to die at Deep Cut. Private Gray was found shot in the head while on guard duty in September 2001. The Army said he also committed suicide, but once again an inquest returned an open verdict. And in March 2002, Private James Collinson, also 17, was found with a single gunshot wound through his chin while on guard duty. An open verdict recorded.
Of the 4 who died, Cheryl is the only death to have been re-examined. The second inquest was ordered after a decision by the High Court quashed the open verdict originally recorded. Now back to Divya Kohli now, who's live outside the coroner's court. Divya, what about the other families? What now for them?
Well, all the other families had wanted a thorough investigation to look at forensic evidence that might have been missed or not collected at the time. Well, Tom Savides has been speaking to the families of the victims and looks back at the troubles of Deep Cut.
Private Jeff Gray was 17 years old when he joined the Army. A few months later, he was dead. This footage was taken of him in training at Deep Cut Barracks shortly before he died in 2001. The pain of losing a son at such a young age is etched on the face of his mother, Diane Gray, who is still struggling to come to terms with his death.
He wasn't a person who would be down. He was full of life. He was a very bubbly character. If he was down, you knew he was down. And he was a very open person. He'd speak about anything, literally anything. And he could tell me anything.
Now, like the family of Cheryl James, Diane Gray is also calling for a fresh inquest into her son's death.
Do you think a new inquest will allow you to get to the bottom of what happened to Jeff?
I don't believe we'll get all of the answers. I said when Jeff died, it's probably going to take about 20 years before we find out what happened, what really happened to Jeff. We are applying for a new inquest, so I do hope the inquest will at least get some of the truth out of what was actually happening there.
The Army and Surrey Police concluded that Sean Benton, Jeff Gray, James Collinson and Cheryl James had all committed suicide. Pressure from the families led to a series of new investigations, inquiries and reviews. In April 2002, Surrey Police opened a joint investigation into the deaths of Private Jeff Gray and Private James Collinson. The force said it was also reviewing the deaths of Private Cheryl James and Sean Benton. 2 months later, the families of the 4 soldiers called for a public inquiry. In September 2003, Surrey Police concluded there were no grounds for prosecutions over the deaths. But a year later, after new allegations of rape, bullying and sexual harassment at Deep Cut were disclosed in a leaked police report, the government announced a new review. In March 2006, the Blake Review criticised Army training, citing harassment, discrimination and oppressive behaviour, but concluded that the recruits' deaths were probably self-inflicted. In March 2011, a report by Devon and Cornwall Police found that possible suspects in the deaths were not properly investigated by Surrey Police, and detectives failed to follow new leads. Then, in July 2014, High Court judges ordered a fresh inquest into the death of Private Cheryl James. Today, that inquest found that the Army failed in its duty of care to young recruits, but the coroner said he was satisfied that Cheryl James had taken her own life.
We recognise that Cheryl, like so many teenagers, struggled in certain aspects of her life and had suffered some sad experiences. But she'd overcome these and she was doing well. When she joined the Army, it was like a new beginning for her.
Sean Benton was the first of the 4 young soldiers to be found with gunshot wounds here at Deep Cut Barracks. That was 21 years ago, and the fact that we are still talking about the deaths of those soldiers indicates that many questions still remain unanswered. Deep Cut Barracks are set to close within the next 2 years, bulldozed to make way for new houses. The controversial Army base may soon no longer exist, but for the parents of those young recruits, there is still no closure. Tom Savides, ITV News.
Well, the original inquest into Cheryl's death lasted just an hour and was an open verdict. This one, a narrative verdict, heard from 109 witnesses over 3 months. And Coroner Judge Barker said the more serious allegations of abuse he'd heard were outside the scope of this inquest. We don't know what the families will plan next, but I don't think this is the last that we will hear of Deep Cut.
Divya Kohli, thank you very much. Now, during this inquest, the Army admitted young soldiers lived in a highly sexualised environment where senior staff preyed on recruits in an abuse and misuse of power.
So was a culture of bullying, though never proved to blame for Cheryl's death. Richard Slee investigates.
This is Cheryl James in the first few weeks of her basic training at Pirbright in 1995. It was, by all accounts, a happy time for her before she was at Deep Cut. One of her friends and a colleague also filmed at Pirbright was Dan Griffiths.
Stupid. You went the wrong way, didn't you?
Dan left Deep Cut before Cheryl. He says he remembers her as bubbly and popular, always smiling. And that's why he was so shocked when he was told she'd committed suicide.
Claims coming that she took her own life, it didn't add up. Saying, oh, she was so unhappy, so sad. I hadn't seen any of that. I don't think a lot of people had seen any of that.
Dan remembers Deep Cut as being, in his words, a nasty place that was run by bullying instructors. He says it was intimidating and violence was common.
You didn't want to stand out of line. You don't know who to trust or who to make friends with. It definitely wasn't any of the people over you. You talked to the people that you went through training, but no, there was a lot of fear.
Cheryl's case was one of many deaths at Deep Cut investigated by Surrey Police. But we now know that there were serious mistakes made in those investigations. One former senior detective who was asked to review some of the deaths at Deep Cut claims he was under pressure to confirm the soldiers committed suicide. Colin Sutton says that at the time there was a cosy relationship between some senior police officers and the Army.
The assumption that these were suicides, which was made at the very start, led to really superficial initial investigations being carried out and meant that vital scientific and forensic evidence that could have helped us know a great deal more about what went on wasn't seized at the time.
Solo! Check, 1, 2! Today, the Army is keen to show us that it's learnt from its mistakes. This week, the media was given access to its base in Winchester, where new recruits are put through basic training. The man in charge of the instructors here says the culture is very different from when he joined up.
The recruits are allowed to go up every evening for an hour, couple of hours, to the welfare centre, spend time chatting to different recruits, spend time chatting to the volunteers that work up there. They're amazing. So, yeah, it's really good facilities, and it gives them a chance, you know, to get stuff out of their system without the instructors being around.
These recruits joined the army just 4 weeks ago, and those that we spoke to told us they were happy with their treatment.
There's people we can talk to out of our chain of command if we need to, or with our chain of command, which I'd comfortably do with either.
We've got the Padre in the chapel, we've got welfare down at the NAFI. So there are many people that we can go and see who aren't army.
The overall commander of Army Recruitment and Training says lessons have been learned, especially after Deep Cut.
It was 20 years ago. It was an absolute tragedy. A number of things happened that shouldn't have happened. There's no question about that. For me, the focus is on the here and now, and I hope you've seen today what a really positive experience it is for the young men and women that join the army.
In today's modern army, we're assured that care and supervision is now paramount, and that bullying and harassment is a thing of the past. That may be the lasting legacy of the short life of recruit Cheryl James. Richard Slee, ITV News.
It's 16 minutes past 6 and still to come in tonight's programme.
Forget the Euros, we're kicking off with Soccer Aid. We're behind the scenes with the celebs and the footballing legends.
On to the rest of the day's news now, and 2 people are being questioned over the death of a 2-year-old boy from Dorset. The toddler from Broadmain near Dorchester died last week. Police are treating the death as suspicious. A man and a woman who are both 21 were arrested on suspicion of murder.
Meanwhile, the death of a young girl on the Isle of Wight is being treated as murder. 6-year-old Kezia Flux Edmonds was found unconscious at her house in East Cowes on Wednesday. She later died in hospital. A post-mortem found that her father, Darren Flux Edmonds, killed himself at the house. Police say they're not looking for anyone else.
Fire crews have been tackling a blaze at a derelict building in Bournemouth. It happened at the Belvedere Hotel on Bath Road at 1 o'clock. Crews are searching the building but don't think anyone is still inside. Nearby roads were shut for several hours.
It was a Wiltshire boy's dream to create beautiful gardens for patients at spine injury units around the country. Horatio Chappell was tragically killed by a polar bear 5 years ago, but his first garden was built at Salisbury District Hospital.
Well, this weekend, pottery entrepreneur Emma Bridgewater is opening up her home to help fund a third Horatio's garden. Rachel Hepworth has more.
Is it that barn?
Emma Bridgewater likes a project. When she and her husband bought this semi-derelict medieval castle and farm at Bampton in Oxfordshire, few would have believed they could transform it into a thing of beauty.
Wow. It's like a little Eden. It's so great, isn't it?
But then, that's what they do. The couple are world famous for their distinctive and very British crockery. It even has the Royal Seal of Approval, and success means they've been able to start bringing this wilderness back to life.
So the first thing we did was to plant something like 11,000 trees. We really wanted to kind of bring back the magic of it. It feels like a special place.
On Sunday, they're sharing their special place in aid of Horatio's Garden, a charity which creates gardens at spinal units. The first was in Salisbury.
I was just so impressed by it. I also felt immediately, why isn't this standard? Of course, every hospital should have one, but it's obviously especially vitally important where people are spending a very long time in treatment.
It was the brainchild of Horatio Chappell, a schoolboy from Salisbury, tragically killed by a polar bear. His parents have continued his work, raising funds for a similar garden at Stoke Mandeville Hospital to be started later this year.
What could be more exciting? I mean, a garden is incredibly restorative. It's why the Horatio's project is so compelling. You can't but feel cheered by it.
And for Emma and her husband, who've designed a mug for the charity, the garden isn't just therapeutic, but inspirational.
We draw on the world around us all the time when we're designing. And sometimes that's going for a walk by the Thames, but it's often through the process of gardening.
And that creative instinct is driving their ambitious plans to rebuild parts of the original castle, a modern-day fairy tale and a labour of love. Rachel Hepworth, ITV News in Bampton.
School children in Brighton and Hove could have an extra week of holiday next year. It's part of a trial by the City Council to help families find cheaper holidays and avoid taking pupils out of school during term time. Days will be taken from existing holiday periods. A meeting next week will confirm which month the new holiday will be offered.
Homeless people in Bournemouth are being offered a one-way train ticket to leave the seaside town. It's part of a £200,000 plan by the Borough Council to discourage people from sleeping rough. They say the new strategy uses assertive techniques and procedures, but the idea has been criticised by homeless charities.
Salisbury Cathedral's army of volunteers have received royal recognition. They've won the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service, which is equivalent to an MBE. More than 600 people give up their time to help with a range of jobs, including tomb dusting, flower arranging and assisting during services.
Betting has been suspended on Southampton manager Ronald Koeman leaving to take over as Everton's new boss. Reports suggest he's been offered £6 million a year to take over at Goodison Park. Saints have so far declined to comment.
Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all our stories. Head to itv.com/Meridian. You can call us on 0808 1010 095 or please get in touch via Facebook or Twitter.
A photographer has become the only person to document images of climate change on every continent of the world.
Ashley Cooper spent 14 years travelling and studying the weather, as Fiona Marley-Patterson reports.
Ashley Cooper has spent the last 14 years photographing climate change in over 30 countries on every continent, from the melting of glaciers to drought.
My most recent sort of drought photo shoot was to California, and literally 1/3 of all children in California, one of the richest places in the world, are going to bed hungry directly as a result of the drought, because masses of people have lost their jobs in the agricultural industry when there is no longer enough irrigation water to irrigate the crops and the food can't be grown, farms are going out of business, people are losing their jobs.
Sometimes his work is closer to home with the weather in the UK, but it's even worse elsewhere.
Tuvalu down in the South Pacific is the smallest country in the world, and it probably will be the island that will, the country that will first disappear directly as a result of climate change, because the sea levels have got so high now that during the highest tides of the year, their islands are literally swamped, they're underwater. And it is getting worse and worse every year. Some of the islanders have already moved out, and it looks like within the next 30 years, probably all of the population will have to be moved off Tuvalu.
Scientists disagree on what causes climate change, but Ashley's work has convinced him it's our fault.
Talking to people who are very close to the land, like the Inuits in the Arctic, they will tell you, aside from the science, what they have witnessed in their lifetime about how the climate is changing, how the environment around them is changing. What I have seen has left me utterly convinced that climate change is real and climate change is happening.
Ashley spent £250,000 travelling, funded by selling his images. But as everyone now owns a camera, he's found it harder to make it pay. Now he's trying to raise £50,000 to publish a book of his photos. Fiona Marley-Patterson, ITV News.
Great pictures. Now this weekend, football legends will be teaming up with celebrities to raise money for a safer world for children.
The biennial Soccer Aid clash features Liam and Niall from One Direction, with managers Jose Mourinho and Claudio Ranieri at the helm. Here's Lauren Hall.
Take a group of celebrities, add in a few football legends and divide into two teams, England and the rest of the world. It must be time for Soccer Aid. Held every 2 years, it's back this weekend. Jose Mourinho and Claudio Ranieri are heading up the teams. And just look at some of their players.
I'm very excited. Every now and again when no one's looking, I get the phone out and have a look at the players list, you know, and it's just an absolute dream come true.
I'm thinking I should have done a little bit more training before this. I think every muscle in my body is aching. I knew that this morning when I woke up, and then we've trained on top of it. But overall, I mean, to be here is just such an honour.
Is the pressure on? I guess it must be, if you're playing in front of all those people, having to show off your football skills. How much pressure is there?
Sorry, what football skills? Oh, football skills? No, I don't have any.
Luckily, they're being guided by some of the biggest names in football. They're here to make sure that, unlike the Soccer Aid mascot, no one's running around like a headless chicken. Soccer Aid started 10 years ago, raising money for UNICEF to help children all over the world.
£20 million raised now, nearly, for UNICEF, and it's phenomenal. It really is. And as I say, I'm so grateful to everybody who turns up and has a great time.
Both teams have been looking good in training, so it could go either way this weekend. But 10 years on, with nearly £20 million raised for charity, it's clear who are the real winners. Lauren Hall, ITV News.
And you can see Soccer Aid on ITV from 6 p.m. on Sunday.
Now, what's the score with the weather this weekend? Here's James Wright.
From blizzards to pool, driving through Europe. Eurotunnel the Shuttle sponsors ITV Meridian weather.
Good evening. Disappointingly grey day today. The cloud that we were hoping would thin and break sort of did for some parts, but not for most places. The good news is things are set to change, and it's good news. Bit of a warm front lurking across the eastern side of England. That's going to push its way a little bit further west. It will take a while through tomorrow, but once it does so, it's going to introduce some pretty humid and much warmer air in from the continent, and with it some sunshine. Add the 2 or 3 things together, it looks as though we're going to see some much warmer temperatures. Now, as far as tonight goes, well, temperatures not really dipping that far from today's highs. A little bit of dampness here and there, but really not amounting to much. And then tomorrow morning, grey start. Outbreak of rain here and there, but very light, as I say. Into the afternoon, the cloud starts to move a little further westwards, and that reveals the sunshine, and as a result, temperatures soar. 20 Celsius, 68 in old numbers, just 1 or 2 showers out there, of which 1 or 2 of those could be a little heavy. The good news is the temperatures rise even more on Sunday, could get up to 24 Celsius. Light winds, some good sunny spells after a bit of a slow start will feel very nice indeed, and that's set to last at least into Monday. Bit of a question mark about Tuesday, but it looks as though it'll slowly break down as a new front arrives.
Eurotunnel the Shuttle sponsors ITV Meridian weather. Keeping a close eye on summer. The Pollen Count, sponsored by Ilogy Eye Drops.
And now for the bad news. Moderate counts for the evening as the pollen settles down, but then with all the sunshine expected through the weekend, those grass pollen levels are expected to reach high. Have a good evening.
In just a moment, the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Charlene White.
For now, though, from the team here at ITV Meridian, thank you very much for your company this evening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again on Monday. Enjoy the sunshine. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.